From Srila Prabhupada and Lilamrita, which means the nectar of the pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. So I'm just going to read from wherever the mark is. So this is a section with quotes from a couple of devotees. First it gives the name and then it gives the quote. So this is from Steve, the one that later became Satsuru. He actually was the one who initiated me. Okay. So Swamiji mentioned that mangoes were the king of all fruits. And he even mentioned that they were not easily available in this country, meaning America. It occurred to me that I could bring him mangoes. There was a store on First Avenue that always kept a stock of fresh mangoes in the cooler. The cooler, it means a fridge. It's American for fridge. I began a regular habit. Every day, after getting off work, I would purchase one nice mango and bring it to Swamiji. And then Wally says, Wally became Umapati. Yeah? Umapati. Okay, well, he says, some of the boys would say, I'm going to do this for the Swami. So I went to him and I said, is there something I can do for you? So he told me I could take notes at his class. The boys were sure that their service to Swamiji was spiritual, devotional service. By serving the spiritual master, who was a representative of Krishna, you were serving Krishna directly. One morning, Prabhupada told Howard, who he later became Hayagriva, he told Howard that he needed help in spreading the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. Howard wanted to help, so he offered to type the Swami's manuscripts of Srimad Bhagavatam. And then there's a quote from Howard. The first words of the first verse read, "O the King." And naturally I wondered whether O was the king's name and the king stood in apposition. After some time I figured out that O King was intended instead. I didn't make the correction without his permission. Yes, he said, change it then. I began to point out a few changes and inform him that if he wanted, I could make some corrections, that I had a master's in English and taught last year in the Ohio State University. Oh yes, Swamiji said, do it, put it nicely. So Prabhupada used to say that Hayagriva was a professor, but that was kind of it was kind of being very, I would say, making him more of an academic than he was. He was an English teacher, but he was engaged his knowledge of English language in Prabhupada's service and pleased Prabhupada very much. So it carries on. He was giving them the idea of devotional service. A devotee may not be perfect at first, he said, but if he is engaged in service, once that service has begun, he can be purified. Service is always there, in the material or the spiritual world. But service in the material world could not bring satisfaction to the self. Only bhakti, purified service, service rendered to Krishna could do that. And the best way to serve Krishna was to serve the representative of Krishna. They picked it up quickly. It was something you could do easily. It was not difficult, like meditation. It was activity. You did something, but you did it for Krishna. They had seen the Swamiji respond to the Bowery bum, who had come with a gift of toilet paper. Just see, Swamiji said. He is not in order, but he thought, let me give some service. But service had to be done voluntarily, out of love, not by force. There's another quote from Wally. Swamiji once asked us, do you think you could wear the Vaishnav tilak when you are on the street? I said, well, I would feel funny doing it, but if you want me to, I will. And Swamiji said, no, I don't ask you to do something you don't want to do. And then a quote from Steve. One day, when I brought my daily mango to him, he was in his room surrounded by devotees. I gave him my mango and sat down, and he said, very good boy. The way he said it, as if I were just a little boy, made everyone in the room laugh, and I felt foolish. Swamiji, however, then changed their mood by saying, "No, this is actually love. This is Krishna consciousness." And then they didn't laugh. When Howard first volunteered to do editing, he spent the whole morning working in Swamiji's room. "If there is any more typing," Howard said, "let me know. I could take it back to Mott Street and type there." "More? There's lots more," Swamiji said. He opened the closet and pulled out 2 large bundles of manuscripts tied in saffron cloth. There were thousands of pages, single-spaced manuscripts of Prabhupada's translations of Srimad Bhagavatam. Howard stood before them, astonished. "It's a lifetime of typing," he said. And Prabhupada smiled and said, "Oh yes, many lifetimes." Because of Prabhupada's presence and the words that he spoke there and the kirtans, everyone was already referring to the storefront as the temple. But still, it was just a bare, squalid storefront. The inspiration to decorate the place came from the Mott Street boys. Howard, Keith and Wally devised a scheme to surprise the Swami when he came to the evening kirtan. Wally removed the curtains from their apartment, took them to the laundromat, where they turned the water dark brown from filth, and then dyed them purple. The Mott Street apartment was decorated with posters, paintings, and large decorative silk hangings that Howard and Keith had brought back from India. The boys gathered up all their pictures, tapestries, incense burners, and other paraphernalia, and took them along with the purple curtains to the storefront, where they began their day of decorating. At the storefront, the boys constructed a wooden platform for Prabhupada to sit on and covered it with old velvet cloth. Behind the platform, on the rear wall between the 2 windows to the courtyard, they hung the purple curtains, flanked by a pair of orange ones. Again, 1 orange panel just above Swamiji's sitting place, and they hung a large original painting of Radha and Krishna on a circular canvas that James Green had done. Prabhupada had commissioned James, giving him the dust jacket from his Srimad Bhagavatam with its crude Indian drawing as a model. The figures of Radha and Krishna were somewhat abstract, but the Lower East Side critics who frequented the storefront hailed the work as a wonderful achievement. Keith and Howard were less confident that Prabhupada would approve of their paintings and prints from India, so they hung them near the street side of the temple, away from Swamiji's seat. One of these prints, well known in India, was of Hanuman carrying a mountain through the sky to Lord Ramachandra. The boys had no idea what kind of being Hanuman was. They thought perhaps he was a cat because of the shape of his upper lip. Then there was a picture of the male person with 6 arms. 2 arms painted greenish held a bow and arrows. Another pair, bluish, held a flute. And the third pair, golden, held a stick and a bowl. Does anybody know who that is? Sabhuj, yeah. So he has 2 arms that are Lord Ram, 2 arms that are Krishna, and 2 arms that are Lord Chaitanya. So he's a combination of all 3 personalities. And the name Sadbhuj means 6 arms.
By late afternoon, they had covered the sitting platform, hung the curtains, tacked up the decorative silks and prints, and hung the paintings, and were decorating the dais with flowers and candlesticks. Someone brought a pillow for Swamiji to sit on, and a faded cushion from an overstuffed chair for a backrest. In addition to the Mott Street cash, Robert Nelson took one of his grandfather's Belgian-style oriental rugs from his garage in the suburbs and brought it by subway to 26 Second Avenue. Even Raphael and Don took part in the decorating. The secret was well kept, and the boys waited to see Swamiji's response. That night, when he walked in to begin the kirtan, he looked at the newly decorated temple. There was even incense burning, and he raised his eyebrows in satisfaction. "You are advancing," he said, as he looked around the room, smiling broadly. "Yes," he added, "this is Krishna consciousness." His sudden happy mood seemed almost like their reward for their earnest labors. He then stepped up on the platform while the boys held their breath, hoping it would be sturdy. And he sat looking out at the devotees and the decorations. They had pleased him, but he now assumed a feature of extreme gravity. And though they knew he was certainly the same Swamiji, their utterings stuck in their throats, and their happy glances to each other suddenly abated in uncertainty and nervousness. As they regarded Swamiji's gravity, their joy of a few moments, suddenly seemed childish, as a cloud quickly covers the sun like a dark shade. Prabhupada changed his mood from jolly to grave, and they spontaneously resolved to become equally grave and sober. He picked up the kartals and again smiled a ray of appreciation, and their hearts beamed back. The temple was still a tiny storefront with many hidden and unhidden cockroaches, a tilted floor and poor lighting. But because many of the decorations were from India, it had an authentic atmosphere, especially with Swamiji present on the dais. Now guests who entered were suddenly in a little Indian temple. Mike Grant, I think that's Mukunda, yeah? Mukunda, Mike Grant. Mike Grant says, "I came one evening and all of a sudden there were carpets on the floor, pictures on the wall and paintings. Just all of a sudden it had blossomed and was full of people. I was amazed how in just a matter of days people had brought so many wonderful things. When I came that evening and saw how it had been decorated, then I wasn't so much worried that he was going to make it. I thought it was really beginning to take hold now." Prabhupada looked at his group of followers. He was moved by their offering of a seat of honor and their attempts at decorating Krishna's storefront. To see a devotee make an offering to Krishna was not new for him, but this was new. In New York, this horrible place, the seed of bhakti was growing, and naturally, as the gardener of their tender sprout, he was touched by Krishna's mercy. Glancing at the pictures on the wall, he said, "Tomorrow I will come and look at the pictures and tell you which are good." That means that some of them were bogus. The next day, Prabhupada came down to appraise the new artwork on display. One framed watercolor painting was a man playing a drum while a girl danced. "This one is all right," he said. But another painting of a woman was more mundane, he said. "No, this painting is not as good." He walked to the back of the temple, followed anxiously by Howard, Keith and Wally. When he came upon the painting of the six-armed person, he said, "Oh, this is very nice." "Who is it?" Wally asked. "This is Lord Chaitanya," Prabhupada replied. "Why does he have 6 arms?" "Because he showed himself to be both Ram and Krishna. These are the arms of Ram, and these are the arms of Krishna." "And what are the other 2 arms?" Keith asked. "These are the arms of a sannyasi." He went to the next picture. "This is also very nice." "Who is it?" Howard asked. "This is Hanuman." "Is he a cat?" "No," Prabhupada replied, "he's a monkey." Hanuman is glorified in the scripture Ramayana as a valiant, faithful servant of Lord Ramachandra. Millions of Indians worship the incarnation of Lord Ram and his servitor Hanuman, whose exploits perennially exhibited in theatre, cinema, art, temple and worship. In not knowing who Hanuman was, the Mott Street boys were no less ignorant than old ladies uptown who, when Prabhupada had asked whether any of them had seen a picture of Krishna, had all stared blankly. The Lower East Side mystics didn't know Hanuman from a cat, and had brought back from their hashish version of India a picture of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu without even knowing who he was. Yet there was an important difference between these boys and the ladies uptown. The boys were serving Swamiji and chanting Hare Krishna. They were through with material life and the middle-class work-reward syndrome. Their hearts had awakened in Swamiji's promise of expanded Krishna consciousness, and they sensed in his personal company, something exalted like the Bowery bum who had donated toilet paper during Prabhupada's lecture. The Lower East Side boys did not have their minds quite in order, and yet, as Prabhupada saw it, Krishna was guiding them from within. Prabhupada knew that they would change for the better by chanting and hearing about Krishna. The summer of 1966 moved into August, and Prabhupada kept good health. For him, these were happy days. New Yorkers complained of the summer heat waves, but this caused no inconvenience to one accustomed to the 100-degree plus temperatures of Vrindavan's blazing summers. "It is like India," he said, as he went without a shirt, seemingly relaxed and at home. He had thought that in America he would have to subsist on boiled potatoes. Otherwise there would be nothing but meat. But here he was happily eating the same rice, dal and chapatis and cooking on the same 3-stacked cooker as in India. Working on the Bhagavatam, his work on the Bhagavatam had also gone on regularly since he had moved into the 2nd Avenue apartment. And now Krishna was bringing these sincere young men who were cooking, typing and hearing from him regularly, chanting Hare Krishna and asking for more. Prabhupada was still a solitary preacher, free to stay or go, writing his books in his own intimate relationship with Krishna, quite independent of the boys in the storefront. But now he had taken the International Society for Krishna Consciousness as his spiritual child. The inspiring young men, some of whom had already been chanting steadily for over a month. They were like stumbling spiritual infants. He felt responsible for guiding them. They were beginning to consider him their spiritual master, trusting him to lead them in their spiritual life. Although they were unable to immediately follow the multifarious rules that Brahmanas and Vaishnavas in India followed, he was hopeful. According to Rupa Goswami, the most important principle is that one should somehow or other become Krishna conscious. People should chant Hare Krishna and render devotional service. They should engage whatever they had in the service of Krishna. And Prabhupada was exercising the best principle of Krishna consciousness to the furthest limit the history of Vaishnavism had ever seen. Although he was engaging the boys in cooking and typing, Prabhupada was not doing any less himself. Rather, for every sincere soul who came forward to ask for service, 100 came who wanted not to serve but to challenge. Speaking to them, sometimes shouting and pounding his fists, Prabhupada defended Krishna against the Mayavad philosophy. This was also his service to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur. He had not come to America to retire. So with the passing of each new day came another confirmation that his work and his followers and his challenges would only increase. How much he could do was up to Krishna. I am an old man, he said. I may go away at any moment. But if he were to go away now, certainly Krishna consciousness would also go away, because Krishna conscious society was nothing but him, his figure leading the chanting, while his head moved back and forth in the small motions of ecstasy, his figure walking in and out of the temple, through the courtyard or into the apartment, his person sitting down smilingly to discuss philosophy by the hour. He was the sole bearer and maintainer of the small, fragile, controlled atmosphere of Krishna consciousness in New York's Lower East Side. Chapter 19. So it starts from a little excerpt from a conversation between Hayagriva and Prabhupada. Does what you told us this morning, Howard asked, mean we are supposed to accept the spiritual master to be God? That means he is due the same respect as God, being God's representative, Prabhupada replied calmly. Then he is not God? No, Prabhupada said. God is God. The spiritual master is his representative. Therefore he is as good as God, because he can deliver God to the sincere disciple. Is that clear? So that's the end of the quote, and then it starts talking about what was happening in the August in the storefront. It was a makeshift, a storefront turned temple, and a 2-room apartment transformed into the Guru's residence and study. But it was complete nonetheless. It was a complete monastery amid the city slums. The temple, the storefront, was quickly becoming known among the hip underground of the Lower East Side. The courtyard was a strangely peaceful place for aspiring monks, with its little garden, bird sanctuary, and trees squeezed in between the front and the rear buildings. The Swamiji's back room was the inner sanctum of the monastery. Each room had a flavor all of its own, or rather it took on its particular character from the Swamiji's activities there. The temple room was his kirtan and lecture hall. The lecture was always serious and formal. Even from the beginning, when there was no dais, he had to sit on a straw mat facing a few guests. It was clear he was there to instruct, not to invite casual give-and-take dialogue. Questions had to wait until he finished speaking. The audience would sit on the floor and listen for 45 minutes as he delivered the Vedic knowledge intact, always speaking on the basis of Vedic authority, quoting Sanskrit quoting the previous spiritual masters, delivering perfect knowledge supported with reason and argument. While contending with noises of the street, he lectured with exacting scholarship and deeply committed devotion. It appeared that he had long ago mastered all the references and conclusions of his predecessors and had even come to anticipate all intellectual challenges. That's actually a method of preaching Prabhupada used, or it's a standard method, is that you anticipate the objections of your reader or your hearer. So you may think that they're going to have some atheistic objection, or some Mayavad objection, some materialistic obstacle to what you're saying. So you anticipate that, and then you speak about it before they raise their doubt or their question or objection. You counter them before they even say anything. So Prabhupada is saying that Prabhupada was doing that. He also held kirtans in the storefront. Like the lectures, the kirtans were serious, but they were not so formal. Prabhupada was lenient during the kirtan. Visitors would bring harmoniums, wooden flutes, guitars, and they would follow the melody or create their own improvisations. Someone brought an old string bass and bow, and an inspired guest would always pick it up the bow, and would pick up the bow and play along. Some of the boys had found the innards of an upright piano waiting on the curb with someone's garbage, and he had brought it to the temple and placed it near the entrance. During a kirtan, freewheeling guests would run their hands over the wires, creating strange vibrations. Robert Nelson, several weeks back, had brought a large cymbal that now hung from the ceiling, dangling close by Swamiji's dais. But there was a limit to the extravagance. Sometimes when a newcomer picked up the kartals and played them in a beat other than the standard 1, 2, 3, Prabhupada would ask one of the boys to correct him, even at the risk of offending the guest. Prabhupada led the chanting and drummed with one hand on a small bongo. Even on this little bongo drum, he played Bengali Mridanga rhythms, so interesting that local Congo drummers would come just to hear. The Swamiji gets in some good licks, that's a quote. The Swami's kirtan were a new high, and the boys would glance at each other with widening eyes and shaking heads as they responded to his chanting, comparing it to their previous drug experiences and signaling each other favorably. This is great. It's better than LSD. Hey man, I'm really getting high on this. And Prabhupada encouraged their newfound intoxication. It must have been potent, having kirtan directly with Prabhupada. I remember once in Ireland, we just played Prabhupada chanting Hare Krishna. We just had in those days it was a tape. We had played a tape of Prabhupada chanting, and we all just followed. So Prabhupada would chant and we would follow, Prabhupada would chant, we follow, like that. And by the end of an hour or so, everybody was standing up like in ecstasy chanting. Because Prabhupada, he was there chanting with us. It was, I think we should maybe try that one day. It's very powerful. Okay. As maestro of these kirtans, he was also acting expertly as guru. Lord Chaitanya had said, there are no hard and fast rules for chanting the holy name. And Prabhupada brought the chanting to the Lower East Side just that way. A kindergarten of spiritual life, he once called the temple. Here he taught the ABCs of Krishna consciousness, lecturing from Bhagavad Gita and leading the group chanting of Hare Krishna. Sometimes, after the final kirtan, he would invite those who were interested to join him for further talks in his apartment. The final kirtan means that he had a kirtan and then he lectured and then he would have another kirtan. In the back room of his apartment, Prabhupada was usually alone, especially in the early morning hours, 2, 3 and 4 a.m., when almost no one was awake. In these early hours his room was silent and he worked alone in the intimacy of his relationship with Krishna. He would sit on the floor behind his suitcase desk, worshipping Krishna by typing the translations and purports of his Srimad Bhagavatam. But this same back room was also used for meetings, and anyone who brought himself to knock on the Swami's door could enter and speak with him at any time, face to face. Prabhupada would sit back from his typewriter and give his time to talking, listening, answering questions, sometimes arguing or joking. A visitor might sit alone with him for half an hour before someone else would knock, and Swami would invite the newcomer to join them. New guests would come and others would go, but Swamiji stayed and sat and talked. Generally, visits were formal. His guests would ask philosophical questions, and he would answer, much the same as after a lecture in the storefront. But occasionally some of the boys who were becoming serious followers would monopolize his time, especially on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday and Sunday night, when there was no evening lecture in the temple. Often they would ask him personal questions. What was it like when he first came to New York? What about India? Did he have followers there? Were his family members devotees of Krishna? What was his spiritual master like? And then Prabhupada would talk in a different way, quieter, more intimate and humorous. He told how one morning in New York he had first seen snow. And he thought someone had whitewashed the buildings. Whitewash is paint, cover the brickwork with paint. So Prabhupada thought that's what had happened when he saw the snow everywhere. He told how he had spoken at several churches in Butler. And when the boys asked what kind of churches they were, he smiled and replied, "I don't know." And they laughed with him. He would reminisce freely about the British control of India and about Indian politics. He told them it was not so much Gandhi as Subhas Chandra Bose who had liberated India. Subhas Chandra Bose had gone outside of India and started the Indian National Army. He entered an agreement with Hitler that Indian soldiers fighting for British India who surrendered to the Germans could be returned to the Indian National Army to fight against the British. And it was this show of force by Bose, more than Gandhi's non-violence, which led to India's independence. He talked of his childhood at the turn of the century, when the street lamps were gas-lit and carriages and horse-drawn trams were the only vehicles on Calcutta's dusty streets. These talks charmed the boys even more than the transcendental philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, and drew them affectionately to him. He told about his father, Gaur Mohan De, a pure Vaishnav. His father had been a cloth merchant, and his family had been intimately related with the aristocratic Muliks of Calcutta. The Muliks had a deity of Krishna, and Prabhupada's father had given him a deity to worship as a child. He used to imitate the worship of the Govinda deity in the Mulik's temple. As a boy, he had held his own Ratha Yatra festivals each year, imitating in miniature the gigantic festival at Jagannath Puri. And his father's friends used to joke, "Oh, the Ratha Yatra ceremony is going on at your home, and you do not invite us? What is this?" His father would reply, "This is a child's play, that's all." But the neighbors said, "Oh, child's play, you are avoiding us by saying it's for children." Prabhupada fondly remembered his father, who had never wanted him to be a worldly man, who had given him lessons in Mridanga, who had prayed to visiting sadhus that one day the boy would grow up to be a devotee of Radharani. Okay, well, we stop there because it's 8:45, our designated time for ending the class. Does anybody want to say anything? Is it okay? Anybody who wants to bring a mango for Krishna? For Srila Prabhupada? You want to say? I don't understand the question, sorry. We just have to see everything as Krishna's arrangement. If everything's Krishna's arrangement, there's never a problem. If everything's Krishna's arrangement, there's never a problem. Isn't it? If we see things separate from Krishna, then there's a problem.
No, I don't see that. I ask to see, because sometimes I try to forgive that he was not honest with me in life, or because of ignorance and of Maya. We don't see we are poor and perfection. But sometimes I try to be more performant and to forgive and change immediately, to neglect me and after for me and for others. Also, I cannot see for others. I saw in my past that when I try to be in Nishta, Nishta stage, I could be hurt by indifference or of others that they don't care because I was expectation. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he got the mission, straight line, and he said at the time that for self-materialist, for the servant of Srimati Radharani, we should follow all this path to
Yeah.
the
Well, that's the way I just try to see everything as Krishna's arrangement, and then it just makes it simple. I mean, I don't analyze things so much, and I don't, if just say something happens I don't like, I think, well, I must have done something, I must have done something to deserve this. Then we understand that we're the cause of our own suffering. We are our own cause. It says in the Bhagavatam, who can you blame if you bite your tongue? You understand? If you bite your own tongue, you can't blame anybody else. No. So if we're suffering, it's a result of our identifying with the mind, and at least previously, maybe we're giving up identifying with the mind and the body, But previously we were identifying with the mind and the body, and that has led us to do to certain activities, you know, they're not fully Krishna conscious, and which has led us to, you know, apparently suffer now. But the adjustment is just to see everything as Krishna. I mean, I can say that because when you sit here, you have to say the absolute proper standard philosophy. You can analyze psychologically, and you can, you know, try and apply the philosophy in every single situation, but you just keep it simple and just say, well, I'm here because Krishna has arranged, and these people are Krishna's instruments to purify me, and I should be very grateful. I should be very grateful that I'm in association of devotees, even if they don't appear to be the highest standard of devotees. They're Krishna's representatives, you know. Otherwise we puffed up, you know. You think you can judge other people, or we may think, you know, what is this person doing to me? Actually, we deserve much worse. Hare Krishna. Just